Do you hear that? The rain against your window? It's rather soothing, isn't it? But rain in the wilderness, well, that's a different beast entirely. It doesn't just fall, it isolates you, drowns out the world, makes you vulnerable. Have you ever been camping in the rain? Somewhere remote, somewhere like New Mexico? I ask because that's where my story begins, in the Gila National Forest. And I wonder, as I tell you this, if you're somewhere safe and warm. I hope you are. I used to lead wilderness expeditions. Tour guide, survival expert, call what you want. Decent pay, flexible hours, and I got to be outdoors. Been doing it for nearly 7 years. The Gila wilderness was always my favorite. Ancient cliff dwellings, hot springs, pine forests that stretch forever. Quite beautiful in daylight. This particular trip was meant to be routine. For clients, a retired couple, Margaret and David, celebrating their 40th wedding anniversary. A university professor, Elaine, researching indigenous folklore, and her colleague, Robert, a geology expert, all experienced hikers, which made my job easier. I'd planned a 5-day trek through some of the less touristy areas. We were going to visit ancient cave dwellings that most guides don't bother with. Remote? Yes, but I knew the area well enough. Or so I thought. The forecast had predicted clear skies, but New Mexico weather can turn quickly. We were 3 days and when the clouds rolled across the mountains like a dark tide. I remember watching them from our lunch spot, a rocky outcrop overlooking a valley of ponderosa pines, and feeling that distinct uneasiness that comes when nature decides to change its mind. Should we head back at him? Margaret asked, following my gaze. Her voice carried a hint of anxiety. At 65, she was surprisingly fit, but also sensibly cautious. It's a bit late for that, I replied, calculating the distance in my head. Our designated campsite is just 2 hours ahead. We'd need at least 5 to get back to any shelter. Robert, who'd been recording geological formations in his notebook, looked up. Weather system like that in these mountains. We're in for a proper soaking, I'd wager. I nodded. Let's pack up. We need to reach camp before this hits. We never did make it to that campsite. The rain started as a gentle patter, but quickly transformed into a relentless downpour that rendered the trail treacherous. Smooth rock faces became slick waterfalls. Dirt paths turned to mud traps. I was forced to divert us to an emergency site I knew. A small plateau protected by an overhanging cliff. Not ideal, but it would keep the worst of the deluge off us. By the time we reached it, we were drenched to the bone. Night was falling quickly, the dense clouds accelerating the darkness. I helped everyone set up their tents, battling the wind that seemed determined to snatch the fabric from our fingers. My hands were numb, but years of experience took over. 40 minutes later, our little camp was established. 2 tents for the clients, 1 for me. Try to get some rest, I told them as they huddled at the entrance to their tents. Clutching mugs of instant coffee, I prepared on my portable stove. This should blow over by morning. I didn't believe that. Not really. Something about the density of those clouds, the unrelenting quality of the rain. It felt persistent, settled in. But as a guide, projecting calm was part of the job. Once everyone had retreated to their tents, I sat alone under the rocky overhang, watching the silver sheets of water cascade down just feet away from me. The sound was deafening, like being behind a waterfall. I pulled my waterproof jacket tighter around me and checked my satellite phone. No signal. That wasn't entirely unexpected in these remote pockets of wilderness. I'd try again in the morning when we could move to higher ground. It must have been around midnight when I finally crawled into my tent. The rain hadn't let up at all. If anything, it had intensified. I lay in my sleeping bag, listening to the rhythmic drumming on the tent fabric, and eventually drifted into a fitful sleep. I'm not sure what woke me, a sound that didn't belong, something beneath the constant rush of rain. My eyes snapped open in the darkness of my tent. My watch read 3:17 a.m. I lay perfectly still, listening intently. There, a voice. No voices. Whispering. Initially, I assumed it was one of my clients, perhaps having a midnight conversation outside. But as I focused on the sound, I realized it wasn't coming from our camp. It seemed to be emanating from a forest beyond the cliff's edge. Multiple voices, so faint I could barely distinguish them from the rain, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. I unzipped my sleeping bag and fumbled for my torch. The sound of the zip seemed obscenely loud in confined space. Outside, the rain continued to assault, a constant white noise that somehow made the whispering voices more unsettling, not less. Pulling on my boots and rain jacket, I cautiously unzipped my tent and peered out. The camp was still. The other two tents showed no signs of activity. The whispering continued, barely audible but unmistakably there. It wasn't English, that much I could tell. The language had a rhythmic, almost musical quality to it. I stepped fully outside, switching on my torch. Its beam cut weakly through the darkness and curtains of rain. Water immediately began to trickle down my neck despite my hood. The rocky overhang provided some shelter for our tents. But beyond that, the night was a wall of water, and the whispering grew louder as I moved toward the edge of our plateau. I swept my torch across the tree line below, but the visibility was poor, 20 feet at most, just pines swaying in the storm, their branches glistening with rain. "Hello," I called, immediately feeling foolish. If there were actual people out there in this deluge, they'd be in serious trouble. But who would be wandering these remote mountains at night in this weather? The whispering stopped abruptly at the sound of my voice. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the mysterious voices. I stood there, rain pelting my jacket, heart thumping in my chest. Had I imagined it? Was my mind playing tricks, fabricating patterns from the white noise of rain? Then I heard it, a crack of a branch, unmistakable even to the din of the storm. Close by, at the bottom of the short slope that led up to our plateau. I directed my torch beam downward. Nothing but rain and darkness. Another crack, closer now, and another. Something was climbing up toward our camp. I backed away slowly, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. My torch beam shook with my trembling hand. "Who's there?" I called, trying to sound authoritative despite the fear climbing up my spine like cold fingers. The whispering resumed, louder now, multiple voices, overlapping, urgent, still in that strange, sing-song language. And now I could tell they were coming from all around, not just below. My torch beam caught movement, a figure standing at the edge of the plateau, partially obscured by the curtain of rain. Humanoid, but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin. I couldn't make out features, just a dark silhouette. I stumbled backward, nearly losing my footing on the slick stone. "Who are you?" I managed to call out. The figure didn't move. The whispering grew louder. I needed to wake the others. We needed to move, now. I turned and rushed back to the tents. "Everyone up!" I shouted, my voice breaking. "We need to move. Now!" I went to Robert and Elaine's tent first, frantically unzipping the entrance. "Wake up, we need to." The tent was empty. Ice flooded my veins. I turned and lunged for Margaret and David's tent, tearing at the zipper with numb fingers. Empty as well. My mind reeled. Had they gone looking for something? Wanted off? But their sleeping bags were still there, neatly laid out. Their boots still lined up at the entrance to their tent. I spun around, sweeping my torch across our little camp. Margaret, David, Elaine, Robert. Only the rain answered me. The whispering had stopped again. The figure was gone from the edge of the plateau. I was alone. Or was I? A sound behind me. A soft footfall on wet stone. I whirled around, the torch beam slicing through darkness. There was a figure standing directly behind me. Not one of my clients. It stood at least 7 feet tall, impossibly thin, its limbs too long for its torso. Its skin, where I could see it in the torchlight, was a pallid gray, slick with rain. But its face was just wrong. Eyes too large, too dark, set in a face that seemed almost unfinished, like clay that had begun to melt in the rain. I couldn't scream, couldn't breathe. My torch slipped from my fingers and clattered to the ground, its beam spinning crazily before settling on nothing but empty stone. The whispering exploded around me. Dozens of voices now, all speaking urgently in that strange language. I finally managed to draw a breath and let out a scream that was snatched away by the storm. I turned and ran, blind in the darkness, rain lashing at my face. I don't know how long I ran. The plateau gave way to a steep slope, and I half ran, half slid down it, crashing through underbrush, slipping on mud and wet stone. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but the whispering followed me, somehow always just behind, just beside me, no matter how fast I ran. I collided with a tree trunk hard enough to send me sprawling backward into the mud. Pain exploded in my shoulder. I lay there, gasping, rain pounding my face, waiting for whatever was pursuing me to catch up. But nothing came. The whispering had stopped again. Just the rain remained, steady and relentless. I don't know how long I lay there, dazed and terrified. Minutes, maybe hours. Eventually, I forced myself to my feet. I had lost my torch, my pack, everything except the clothes on my back. I was hopelessly lost in a remote wilderness, in the middle of a storm, in the middle of the night, and I was being hunted by something. I needed shelter, needed to think. To my right, barely visible through the rain, I could make out a darker patch in the rock face, a shallow cave or overhang. It was better than nothing. I limped toward it, my right ankle protesting with each step. The cave was little more than an indentation in the cliff face, maybe 4 feet deep, but it was dry and, most importantly, empty. I collapsed against the back wall, shivering violently. What had happened to my clients? Where had they gone? And what were those things that had taken their place? I tried to think logically. Perhaps I had become disorientated. Perhaps I had gone to the wrong camp, the wrong plateau. But no, I recognized our equipment. Those were our tents. And there was no mistaking that figure I had seen. That wasn't human. I huddled in my little cave, watching the rain turn the world into a watercolor of grays and blacks. What were my options? I had no equipment, no phone, no way to call for help. When dawn came, I could try to find my way back to the trail. But would those things still be hunting me? As if in answer to my thoughts, the whispering returned, faint at first, then growing louder, coming closer. I pressed myself deeper into the shallow cave, as if the stone could swallow me up and hide me. My heart hammered, so hard I could feel in my throat. A figure appeared at the mouth of the cave. Tall, thin, and human. Water streamed off it in rivulets. Those two large eyes fixed on me, unblinking. "What do you want?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. It cocked its head to one side, an almost curious gesture. Then it spoke, not in whispers this time, but in a clear, resonant voice that cut through the sound of rain. "We want what was promised." The voice was beautiful, musical, utterly at odds with the grotesque figure before me. "I don't understand," I said, my back pressed so hard against the stone that it hurt. I promised nothing. The creature's mouth didn't move when it spoke again. "Not you, the ones who came before, the ones who dwelled in the shadows of these mountains. They promised us a reckoning." More figures appeared behind the first. 3, then 5, then too many to count. All with those same elongated limbs, those same melted features, those same dark, unblinking eyes. "My clients," I managed to say. "What did you do with them?" "They are part of the reckoning now," the creature replied, its head tilted further, almost horizontal. "As you will be." They moved into the cave as one, those impossibly long arms reaching for me. I screamed, a sound of pure animal terror that I didn't recognize as my own. Then, abruptly, they stopped. Their heads snapped up as if listening to something I couldn't hear. Without a word, they retreated back into the rain and darkness, moving with a fluid grace that was horrifying to watch. I sat there, shaking uncontrollably, afraid to move, afraid to breathe too loudly. What had frightened them off? The answer came with the first pale light of dawn seeping through the rain clouds. Morning had arrived, and with it, an end to whatever nightmarish power had held sway during the darkness. I waited until full daylight before venturing out. The rain had finally stopped, though the forest dripped and shimmered with its aftermath. I had no idea where I was, but I knew I needed to find my way back to civilization. It took me 2 days of wandering, surviving on water from streams, and a few energy bars I had in my jacket pocket. 2 nights huddled in whatever shelter I could find, paralyzed with fear as darkness fell, listening for whispers that never came. On the 3rd day, I stumbled onto a hiking trail, and by sheer luck, encountered a pair of day hikers who helped me reach a ranger station. I told them I had become separated from my group during the storm. I said nothing of the whispering voices, the inhuman figures, the empty tents. Who would believe me? A search party was dispatched to find my missing clients. They found our camp exactly as I had described it. 3 tents set up beneath a rock overhang, but no sign of Margaret, David, Lane, or Robert. Their possessions were there, untouched, their sleeping bags laid out neatly, their boots still lined up outside their tents. They were never found. The official report cited flash flooding as the probable cause of their disappearance. It suggested they had left the camp during the night, perhaps to secure equipment or seek better shelter, and been swept away by sudden floodwaters. I know better. I've never returned to the Gila wilderness. I've never led another expedition. I rarely venture outdoors at all anymore, especially when rain is forecasted. Because rain isn't just water falling from the sky. It's a veil between worlds, a door that can open both ways. And somewhere in those mountains, in the ancient darkness beneath the pines, something waits for its reckoning, something that whispers in the rain. Do you hear that sound outside your window now? Is it just rain? Or is it something else, something older, something patient, whispering your name? I wouldn't open the curtains to check. If I were you, some doors, once acknowledged, can never be closed again. The rain is falling harder now, isn't it? And doesn't it sound just a little bit like whispering? The rain's quite heavy tonight, isn't it? I find myself listening to it more carefully these days, more suspiciously, ever since that trip to New Mexico last autumn. The way it drums against your windows reminds me of the way it sounded against the tent fabric that night. Persistent, almost like it was trying to get in. Have you ever been to Chaco Canyon? It's in the northwest corner of New Mexico. Ancient ruins, ancestral pueblo structures, petroglyphs carved into sandstone cliffs that have survived 1,000 years of wind and rain. Fascinating place during the day, but at night, well, that's what I want to tell you about. I'm an anthropology professor, or I was. I've taken a leave of absence since the incident. I've been studying southwestern indigenous cultures for nearly 2 decades, particularly their relationship with the cosmos. The ancient Puebloans were extraordinary astronomers. They built their structures to align perfectly with solar and lunar cycles, doorways that catch the light only on solstices, windows that frame specific stars at specific times of year. Remarkable engineering. Really, I'd been to Chaco Canyon at least a dozen times before, always with colleagues or students. But this trip was different. I was alone for starters, and I had special permission to camp within the canyon itself, something typically forbidden to the general public. My research credentials and long-standing relationship with the Park Service had earned me this rare privilege. I was there to document a particular set of petroglyphs that, according to my calculations, will align perfectly with the Orion constellation during the autumn equinox. If I was right, it would support my theory about Chacoan cosmological practices. I set up camp in a small clearing near Pueblo Bonito, the largest of the great houses in the canyon. It was a simple setup, just my tent, a small fire pit, again, special permission, and my research equipment. I had 3 nights to conduct my observations, with the equinox occurring on the second night, the first day when as expected. I hiked to the petroglyph site, confirmed my angles and positions, calibrated my equipment. The weather was glorious, that perfect New Mexico autumn. Cool but not cold, the sky an impossible blue. As evening approached, I made my way back to camp, prepared a simple dinner on my portable stove, and settled in for the night. The forecast had mentioned a small chance of precipitation, but nothing serious. Just enough to make me secure my equipment and ensure my tent was properly staked. I drifted off to sleep with the soft murmur of the canyon winds for company. I woke sometime after midnight to the gentle patter of rain on my tent. Nothing alarming, just a light shower. I checked my weather-protected equipment, then returned to my sleeping bag. But sleep wouldn't come again. There was something different about the canyon now. The acoustics had changed. The rain seemed to amplify sounds rather than dampen them. I lay there listening. The rain, the occasional gentle rumble of distant thunder, and something else, a sound I couldn't quite place. A rhythmic tapping, like a finger against wood. Deliberate, patterned. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, pause, tap, 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 tap. I assumed it was rainwater dripping from the canyon walls onto some surface below. Natural rhythms can often seem intentional to the human ear. We're pattern-seeking creatures by nature. Still, it was oddly unsettling, that regular tapping beneath the more chaotic sound of rainfall. I must have dozed off eventually, because the next thing I knew, daylight was filtering through my tent fabric. The rain had stopped. I emerged to find a canyon transformed. The red sandstone darker, more vibrant after the rain. The desert plants more verdant. The air had that distinctive petrichor scent. earth and stone after rain. I spent the day at the petroglyph site, setting up my final equipment, checking and rechecking my calculations. The markings were fascinating. Spirals, concentric circles, anthropomorphic figures with elongated limbs, and one particular set of markings that seemed to mirror the pattern of stars in Orion's belt. Tonight was the night they would align, if my theory was correct. As evening approached, clouds began to gather, not the scattered clouds of the previous day, but heavier, darker formations that threatened more substantial rainfall. I hurried back to camp, secured everything, and prepared for a wet night of observation. The rain began just after sunset, not gentle this time, but a steady, insistent downpour. I huddled in my tent, checking my weather radar app. The storm system was larger than predicted, covering most of northwestern New Mexico, but there were breaks in it. I might still get my window of observation around midnight, when, according to my calculations, the alignment would be perfect. As I waited, I found myself listening for that rhythmic tapping I'd heard the night before, but the rain was too heavy, drowning out subtler sounds, until it wasn't. Around 10 p.m., the downpour eased to a gentle patter, and there was again tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, pause, tap, 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 tap. Only this time it was louder, clearer, less like water dripping and more like deliberate communication. A chill ran down my spine, despite the relative warmth of the evening. I peered out of my tent. The canyon was dark, but not pitch black. A quarter moon provided some illumination through breaks and clouds, and my eyes had adjusted well enough to make out the looming shadows of the ancient structures around me. The tapping was coming from the direction of Pueblo Bonito. I hesitated, torch in hand. I needed to check my equipment anyway. The sky was clearing enough that I might get my observations after all. But that sound, it unnerved me in a way I couldn't articulate. Professional curiosity won out. I put on my rain jacket, grabbed my torch, and ventured out into the damp night. The ground was slick beneath my boots. The path to Pueblo Bonito, while well-maintained, had become treacherous with mud. My torch beam bounced off wet stone and puddles as I made my way carefully toward the great house. The tapping grew louder as I approached, distinctive now, unmistakably rhythmic. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, pause, tap, 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 tap. Over and over, the same pattern. Pueblo Bonito was a hulking shadow against the night sky. The great house had once contained hundreds of rooms, a massive complex of stone and timber. Now it stood in elegant ruin, walls crumbling, but still impressive after a millennium. I stood at the main entrance, listening. The tapping was coming from inside, deep within the labyrinthine structure. "Hello," I called out, immediately feeling foolish. The canyon was closed to visitors. I had the special permit. There shouldn't be anyone else here. My voice echoed off ancient walls, but the tapping didn't stop. If anything, it became more insistent. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, pause, tap, 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 tap. I should have turned back. I should have returned to my tent and written it off as an animal, or water, or the wind moving something loose in the structure. But I didn't. I entered Pueblo Bonito, my torch beam cutting through shadows that seemed darker than they should be. The interior was a maze of rooms and passages. During the day, with sunlight streaming through the roofless chambers, it was beautiful, awe-inspiring. At night, in the rain, it was oppressive. The walls seemed to lean inward. The darkness felt thick, almost tangible. The tapping led me deeper into the structure, through doorways worn smooth by countless hands over centuries, past walls where ancient plaster still clung in patches. I found myself in a kiva, a circular, ceremonial chamber sunk into the ground. The tapping was directly below me now, coming from beneath the stone floor. Impossible. There were no chambers beneath the kivas, at least none that had been documented. Yet the sound was unmistakable, and now it had changed. No longer the repetitive pattern, but a continuous, urgent tapping, like something trying to get out. I knelt on the damp stone, running my hand over the floor. There, a section where the stone felt different, smoother. And was it warm, despite the cool night air? My torch beam revealed what I hadn't noticed before. A petroglyph carved into the floor. A spiral, like the ones I've been studying. But this one seemed newer somehow. The cuts deeper, the edges sharper. The tapping stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. No rain, no wind, no distant thunder. Just a void of sound that felt as oppressive as the darkness around me. Then a whisper, so faint I might have imagined it. Open! I jerked back on the floor, my torch clattering against stone. The beam spun crazily before settling on the opposite wall of the kiva. Hello? I called again, my voice echoing in the circular chamber. Is someone there? Open! The whisper came again, more insistent. Not from below this time, but all around me, as if the very walls were speaking. I scrambled to my feet, snatching up my torch. Who's there? This is a protected archaeological site. You shouldn't be here. Laughter answered me, a sound like dry leaves skittering across stone. We were here first, came the whisper, now directly behind me. I spun around, torch beams slicing through empty air. Nothing, just the ancient walls of the kiva and the night beyond. What do you want? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. The same as you. The whisper seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, to see the stars align. A chill that had nothing to do with the night air ran through me. My research, my theory about the petroglyphs aligning with Orion's belt during the equinox. How could this, whatever was, know about that? Who are you? I demanded. The Watchers, came the whisper. The ones who wait. The ones who remember. My torch beam flickered once, twice, then went out. I was plunged into darkness. So complete it felt solid. Panicking, I fumbled with the torch, shaking it, slapping it against my palm. Nothing. The whispers multiplied, becoming a chorus of dry, rustling voices. The time is near. The door opens. The way is clear. I abandoned the torch and fumbled for my phone. The screen lit up a harsh, blue-white glow that seemed obscenely modern in this ancient place. The time read 11:58 p.m., almost midnight, almost a moment of alignment. Movement caught my eye, a shadow passing in front of the kiva entrance, a figure silhouetted against the night sky, tall, unnaturally so, and wrong somehow, proportions that didn't make sense, limbs too long, head too small. Who's there? I called, my voice breaking. This isn't funny. The figure moved into the kiva. In the dim light from my phone screen, I could see it better. It was, no, it couldn't be. It looked like one of the anthropomorphic figures from the petroglyphs. Elongated limbs, featureless face, moving with a grace that seemed impossible given its ungainly proportions. My phone died. The screen went black, and I was alone in the darkness with whatever this was. The time is now, the chorus of whispers announced. The door opens. Beneath my feet, the stone floor of the kiva began to vibrate. A low hum filled the air, rising in pitch until it hurt my ears. And then light, not from my torch or my phone, but from the stone itself. The spiral petroglyph was glowing, a soft blue-white radiance that illuminated the kiva from below. The tall figure wasn't alone anymore. Others had joined it, a circle of elongated silhouettes around the perimeter of the kiva, all watching me, all waiting. The hum grew louder. The light from the spiral grew brighter, and I understood with sudden, terrible clarity what was happening. The alignment, the stars, the door. I was standing on it. I tried to move, to step away from the glowing spiral, but my feet seemed fused to the stone. The light grew brighter, engulfing me. The whispers became a chant, words in a language I didn't recognize but somehow understood. The gateway opens. The traveler returns. The circle completes. The light was blinding now. The stone beneath my feet no longer felt solid. I was sinking, falling, but not down, sideways through, beyond. The chanting rose to a crescendo. The elongated figures moved closer. And then silence, darkness. I was elsewhere, a place of stars and void, of impossible angles and non-Euclidean geometry. I could see Orion, not as a distant constellation, but as a vast, living entity of light and consciousness. And it was, I don't remember screaming. I don't remember collapsing. I don't remember how long I spent in that other place, that star space where physics and reason had no purchase. I woke at dawn, lying on the floor of the kiva. The stone was dry beneath me, as if the rain had never fallen. My torch lay beside me, functional again when I tested it. My phone was at full battery. I fled, left my equipment, my tent, everything. I hiked out of the canyon to my car and drove until I reached cellular service. Called my department head, told him I was ill, needed to take a leave. He heard something in my voice that prevented further questions. I haven't returned to academia, haven't written up my research, haven't spoken about what happened in that kiva, but I see them sometimes. The elongated figures, watching from the corners of rooms, standing in doorways, always at the edge of vision, gone when I turn to look directly. And I hear them too, whispering, always whispering. The traveler returns. The circle completes. I don't know what it means. I don't know what happened to me in Chaco Canyon. But I know this. There are some doorways that were never meant to be opened, some alignments that were warnings, not invitations. The rain is falling harder now, isn't it? Listen to it. Really listen. Can you hear it? That pattern beneath the chaos? Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, pause, tap, 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 tap. They're calling you too, you know, the watchers, the ones who wait, the ones who remember. Don't answer. Whatever you do, don't answer. And if you ever find yourself in New Mexico, in Chaco Canyon, when the stars are right and the rain is falling, run. Run as far and as fast as you can, because some doors, once open, can never be closed again. Still with us, brave listener? If you're hearing this right now, we'd love to know. Where in the world are you tuning in from? Is it late at night by a campfire? Or maybe you're curled up under blankets at home while the rain taps on your window? And what time is it where you are? Drop a comment below with your location and the time you're listening. It's our way of checking who's made it this far into the dark woods with us. Think of it like leaving a breadcrumb, just in case the stories follow you home. We're listening to The Rain Against Your Window is rather soothing, isn't it? I find myself drawn to it these days. The steady rhythm, the way it blurs the world outside, makes everything seem distant, unreal. Safe, I wasn't always fond of rain. Quite the opposite, in fact. Especially after what happened in New Mexico, in the caves. Have you been to Carlsbad Caverns? Magnificent place. Vast chambers hundreds of feet below the earth. Stalactites and stalagmites formed over millennia, like a cathedral built by time itself. They let tourists see the main chambers, well-lit passages with handrails and smooth paths. But there are other sections, restricted sections, places where the darkness feels different. I was part of a research team studying microbial life in the deeper passages. 4 of us, myself, Dr. Elena Vasquez, our lead biologist, Marcus Chun, our geologist, and Darren Foster, our equipment specialist. We've been granted special access to explore some of the unmapped tunnels branching off from the known network. It was meant to be a 3-day expedition. We'd camp in a large chamber the park rangers had designated as safe, venturing deeper during the day and returning to our base at night. The rangers would check in with us by radio each evening and morning. The first day went precisely according to plan. We collected samples from cave walls where unusual bacterial colonies seemed to be forming. Elena was particularly excited about a phosphorescent strain we discovered in one of the deeper chambers. A pale blue-green glow that pulsed with an almost lifelike rhythm. Extremophiles, she explained as we gathered around the glowing patch. Bacteria that thrive in environments that would kill most organisms. But I've never seen bioluminescent ones in a cave system before. Not like this. Marcus took geological samples from the surrounding rock. The mineral composition here is unusual too. Higher concentrations of rare earth elements than I'd expect could be affecting their metabolic processes somehow. We documented everything meticulously. Photographs, samples sealed in sterile containers, precise GPS coordinates despite being underground. Then we made our way back to our base camp, following the carefully mapped route we'd established. Our camp was comfortable as far as cave camping goes. A flat area in a chamber roughly the size of a school gymnasium. We'd set up our tents, though they were more for privacy than protection from the elements. The temperature in the caves remained a constant 13 degrees Celsius year-round. Not warm, but manageable with proper clothing and sleeping bags. We ate a simple dinner of rehydrated camping food, discussing our findings and planning the next day's exploration. Then, one by one, we retired to our tents. I remember checking my watch before switching off my headlamp. 9:47 p.m. Underground, without the sun's rhythm, time becomes abstract. A number on a watch face, nothing more. I'm not sure what woke me. A sound, perhaps, or the absence of one. The caves are never truly silent. There's always a distant drip of water, the soft whisper of air moving through ancient passages. But something had changed in that soundscape. Something subtle but wrong. My watch read 3:14 a.m. I lay still in my sleeping bag, listening. Outside my tent, I could hear someone moving. Footsteps, soft but distinct on the stone floor. "Hello," I whispered, assuming it was one of my colleagues making a trip to our portable toilet facility. No response. I unzipped my sleeping bag and reached for my headlamp. The beam cut through the darkness as I switched it on, casting long shadows across the tent walls. I slipped on my boots and crawled to the tent entrance. The chamber was empty, or it seemed to be. My headlamp's beam couldn't reach the far walls, just create a bubble of light around me, beyond which the darkness waited. The other 3 tents stood undisturbed. Elena, Marcus, Darren. I called softly, not wanting to wake everyone if it was just one person moving about. No answer. But the footsteps came again, from the tunnel leading deeper into the cave system. A direction we hadn't explored yet. A direction that, according to our maps, wasn't scheduled for exploration at all. I hesitated. Cave systems are dangerous places. Getting lost is a death sentence. We had strict protocols about moving around alone. But those footsteps, they sounded deliberate, almost inviting. I returned to my tent long enough to grab my emergency pack. Water, energy bars, first aid kit, spare batteries, and most importantly, a spool of high-visibility cord we use to mark our paths. Then I moved cautiously toward the tunnel entrance. "Hello." I called again, slightly louder. "Is someone there?" The footsteps stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but the ambient sounds of the cave. Then faintly, so faintly I might have imagined it, a voice. "Help." That decided it. Someone was in trouble. Another researcher? A lost tourist who had somehow bypassed barriers? It didn't matter. I secured one end of my cord to a sturdy stalagmite near our camp and began moving down the tunnel, unspooling it behind me. The passage narrowed quickly, forcing me to crouch. The walls were slick with moisture, glistening in my headlamp's beam. I moved carefully, keeping my breathing steady. The air felt different here. Cooler, yes, but also heavier somehow. More dense. "Hello." I called again. "I'm coming to help. Keep talking so I can find you." No response. But the footsteps resumed, always just ahead, around the next bend, never quite in sight. The tunnel began to slope downward. Steeply, I used handholds in the rock to control my descent. According to our topographical maps, this area should have been solid limestone. No caves, no passages. Yet here I was, moving deeper into the earth. I don't know how long I followed those footsteps. Time stretches strangely in the darkness. But eventually, the narrow passage opened into another chamber. And unlike our camp, this one showed no signs of human preparation. No smooth paths, no surveillance equipment, no markers. What it did have was water. A pool that covered most of the chamber floor, black and still as glass. My headlamp barely penetrated its surface. And on the far side, a figure. It stood perfectly still, facing the pool. A human silhouette, or something very much like one, in the poor light. With the distance and the disorienting reflections off the water, I couldn't make out details. "Hello," I called, my voice echoing off the chamber walls. "Are you hurt? Do you need help?" The figure didn't move, didn't respond, just stood there, a darker shape against the darkness. I checked my cord, still secure, still trailing behind me back to camp. I had enough to cross the chamber, if needed, but that water, something about it set my teeth on edge. It was too still, too black, too expectant. "I'm with a research team." I tried again. "We can help you get out of here, but you need to talk to me." The figure turned then, slowly, deliberately, and as it moved, I realized two things simultaneously. First, it wasn't human, not entirely. The proportions were wrong. The limbs too long, the neck too thin, the head too angular. Second, it was coming toward me, not walking around the pool, but walking across it, on the surface, without creating so much as a ripple. I stumbled backward, nearly losing my footing on the slick stone. My headlamp beam caught the figure's face, or where a face should have been. Instead, there was smooth, pale flesh interrupted only by a single vertical slit that ran from the crown of its head to where its chin should be. The slit opened, not like a mouth, like a wound unzipping. Inside was darkness and teeth. Too many teeth, arranged in concentric circles. And from that impossible mouth came a voice. My voice, exactly as I had spoken moments before. Hello? Are you hurt? Do you need help? I ran. Blind panic overriding everything else. I followed my cord back up the passage, scraping my hands and knees on the rough stone, gasping for breath in the thick air. Behind me, I heard splashing, heavy, purposeful splashing. It had entered the water. It was following. I'm with a research team. My own voice called from behind me, distorted by the strange acoustics of the narrow tunnel. We can help you get out of here, but you need to talk to me. I didn't look back, didn't stop, just kept climbing, following my lifeline, my fingers bleeding from the tight grip on the cord. The passage seemed longer returning, steeper, more claustrophobic. My headlamp beam bounced wildly off the stone walls, creating a disorienting strobe effect. The splashing had stopped, but I could hear it moving behind me, a slithering, wet sound, like something large and heavy dragging itself across stone. We can help you, my voice said from the darkness. Closer now, much closer. We can help you get out. I burst into our base camp, gasping for breath, my body shaking violently. The other tents were as I had left them, undisturbed. I stumbled to Elena's tent first, practically tearing the zipper in my haste. Elena, I gasped. Wake up. We need to. The tent was empty, the sleeping bag neatly arranged as if never used. My blood turned to ice. I lurched to Marcus's tent, empty, then Darren's, empty as well. I was alone, or not alone at all. I turned to face the tunnel I had just emerged from. My cord was still there, trailing into the darkness. But now there was something else. Water. A thin stream of black water flowing from the passage into the chamber. And in that water, small luminous things moved, like the bioluminescent bacteria we'd found earlier, but larger, more purposeful. And from the tunnel came my voice again. We can help you get out. I grabbed my pack, my emergency satellite phone, and ran for the main passage that led back to the tourist section of caves. Back to where there would be rangers, tourists, normalcy. I ran until my lungs burned, following the map route by memory, not daring to look back. I reached the first sign of human presence, a metal railing installed for tourist safety, and collapsed against it, gasping for breath. My satellite phone showed no signal. As expected, this deep underground. I would need to get closer to the entrance. I pushed myself up and continued, slower now, but no less determined. Behind me, I could hear water, flowing water. Following, I reached the main chambers almost an hour later. The tourist paths were illuminated even at night, a safety precaution. The familiar lighting should have been reassuring. It wasn't, because the chambers were empty. No tourists, no rangers, just vast, silent spaces where people should have been. I made for the elevator that would take me to the surface. My phone was showing a weak signal now. Enough to make an emergency call, if I could just get a bit closer to the entrance. The elevator doors were open, waiting. Inside, the lighting flickered subtly. I hesitated. Something about it felt wrong. Felt like a trap. I took the stairs instead. The emergency route that wound its way up through the rock. Hundreds of steps, a grueling climb after everything else. But each step took me closer to the surface, closer to safety. Behind me, always behind me, I could hear water, trickling, flowing, rising. I emerged from the stairwell into the visitor center, empty like everything else. But through the windows, I could see daylight, actual daylight. I moved toward the exit, my phone now showing full signal strength. I dialed emergency services. 911, what's your emergency? My name is Dr. James Harper. I'm at Carlsbad Caverns. My research team is missing, and there's something in the caves. Something not human. I need help. A pause on the line. Then, Dr. Harper, remain where you are. We have personnel en route to your location already. Already? How did you? We received a call from one of your team members over an hour ago, Dr. Elena Vasquez. She reported you missing, said you'd wandered off during the night. They've been searching for you. The phone nearly slipped from my numb fingers. That's impossible. They're gone. All of them. I checked their tents. Dr. Harper, please remain calm. Our personnel report that your colleagues are all accounted for and concerned about your whereabouts. They're bringing them up to the visitor center now. I turned back toward the cave entrance. Water was seeping under the door from the stairwell. Black water. And in that water, things moved. Glowing. Pulsing. Like the bacterial colonies we'd found. But large. The main entrance door is opened. 3 figures enter. Elena, Marcus, Durin, but not quite. Their proportions were slightly wrong. Their movements too fluid. Their smiles too wide. James, Elena's voice said, but her mouth didn't move quite right with the words. We've been so worried. What happened? Why did you run away? They moved toward me as one, and behind them, more water seeped into the visitor center. Black water. Living water. I ran out the emergency exit into the parking lot. My car was there, keys in my pocket. I drove, hands shaking so badly I could hardly steer. In my rear view mirror, I saw them emerge from the building, saw them watch me go, saw them smile those 2 wide smiles. I drove until I reached the nearest town, went straight to the police station, told them everything. They were concerned, but not about what I'd seen, about me, my mental state, my episode. They took me to a hospital, called in specialists. I remember hearing phrases like cave-induced psychosis and sensory deprivation hallucinations. They were very kind, very professional, very wrong, because while I was in that hospital, still trying to convince them of what I'd seen, news reports started coming in, visitors to Carlsbad Caverns falling ill with an unknown infection, symptoms including bioluminescent patches on the skin, behavioral changes, and unnatural thirst. They released me eventually. Diagnosis: acute stress reaction triggered by becoming separated from my team in the cave system. Recommendation: rest, therapy, gradual return to work. I never returned to work, never returned to caves, never returned to New Mexico. But New Mexico found its way to me. In the rain. It started 3 months after the incident. A particularly heavy downpour, the kind that floods storm drains and turns streets into rivers. I was at home, watching the rain from my living room window. And in that rain, in the puddles forming on the pavement outside, I saw them, small glowing things, pulsing with that same blue-green light. They're spreading through the water systems, through the rain, growing, changing, becoming something else, something more. My former colleagues are still working at Carlsbad, still publishing papers, still giving interviews about their groundbreaking discovery of a new extremophile bacteria with remarkable properties. Elena even sent me an email asking me to rejoin the team, saying they've made extraordinary breakthroughs and everything makes sense now. But her language was odd, stilted, as if English had become a second language to her, or as if whatever was using her body hadn't quite mastered the nuances of human communication. I didn't reply. I've moved 3 times since then, always inland, always to places with minimal rainfall. It hasn't helped, because the rain follows me now. Wherever I go, more frequent, more intense, and in every puddle, every droplet, those glowing things watch, wait, grow. I don't know what they are. I don't know what they want, but I know they're patient, ancient, and they've found a way out of their underground prison. Through us, through the water we drink, the rain that falls on our skin, the humidity in the air we breathe. Listen to the rain outside your window. Really listen. Can you hear it? That rhythm that's not quite random, that pattern that sounds almost like words. They're talking to you. They've been talking to all of us. And soon, very soon, we'll understand what they're saying. I'd tell you to run, but there's nowhere to go. Not anymore. The rain falls everywhere eventually, and they are the rain now. All we can do is listen and wait and wonder what will become when they finally decide we're ready. Can you feel the rain on your skin yet? Can you feel it seeping in? Listen to that rain. Gentle but persistent, isn't it? I find comfort in it now. The constancy, the predictability. Unlike the winds of New Mexico, unlike the sands that shift and change and reveal things that should have remained buried. You're warm and safe in your home, I presume? Doors locked? Windows sealed against the rain? Good. That's good. I wish I'd had such foresight before my trip to White Sands. Before I'd ventured into the dunes at night. Before I'd seen what the moonlight reveals when the wind blows just so. I was a photographer. Nature, primarily. Landscapes. I'd made quite a name for myself, capturing the play of light across unusual terrains. White Sand National Park had been on my list for years. Those pristine gypsum dunes stretching for miles like an alien landscape right here on Earth. The contrast of white sand against blue sky, the rippling patterns carved by the wind, the way light and shadow dance across the undulating surface at sunrise and sunset. A photographer's dream. I'd secured a backcountry camping permit. Not easy to get, but my professional credentials helped. This would allow me to be in the dunes at night, to capture the full moon rising over that ghostly landscape. A series of nighttime shots that would, I hoped, form the centerpiece of my next exhibition. The park rangers gave me the standard safety briefing. Stay on marked trails when possible. Carry plenty of water. Be aware that the landscape can shift and familiar landmarks disappear as the wind moves the sand. They warned me about the temperature drop at night, about the disorienting effect of a landscape that looks completely different under moonlight. All this I knew. I was experienced, prepared, or so I thought. I arrived at White Sands in early afternoon, allowing myself plenty of time to hike to my designated backcountry site before sunset. The day was clear, hot, with just a light breeze. Perfect conditions. The main tourist area was busy. Families sledding down dunes on plastic discs. Groups taking photos at the established viewpoints. But as I moved deeper into park, following the marked backcountry trail, the crowds thinned and eventually disappeared altogether. It's a strange feeling being alone in White Sands. The silence is absolute. No birds, no insects, little plant life. Just you and the endless white dunes stretching to horizon in all directions. Your footprints trailing behind you. The only evidence that anything living has passed this way. I reached my designated camping area with several hours of daylight to spare. Set up my small tent, organized my equipment, scouted the nearby dunes for the best angles for my night shots. As the sun began to set, I captured the changing light. The white sand taking on the gold, then pink, then purple hues of sunset. Beautiful, but merely the prelude to what I'd come for. Night fell slowly, the stars appearing one by one in the sky, untainted by light pollution. And then the moon rose, full and bright, transforming the landscape once again. The dunes glowed as if illuminated from within, their crests sharp against the deep blue-black of the night sky. I worked methodically, moving from one location to another, capturing long exposures, light painting certain features with my torch for artistic effect. It must have been around midnight when the wind changed. I'd been so absorbed in my work that I didn't notice immediately, but gradually I became aware that the gentle breeze had strengthened was coming now from the east rather than the south. Not unusual in desert environments. I secured my equipment more carefully and continued working. The wind continued to strengthen. Not a violent wind, but steady, persistent. The fine gypsum sand began to shift visibly, streaming off the crest of dunes like white water. I captured a few shots of this. Motion blur, creating ghostly trails in my long exposures. Striking images, though not what I planned. Then I heard it, a sound beneath the wind, a rhythm, almost like words. I paused, listening intently. Just the wind, surely. Wind through dunes can create strange acoustics. The sand grains shifting against each other. The air moving through the undulating landscape. I'd heard sand dunes sing before in other deserts. This was similar, yet different, more defined, almost deliberate. The temperature was dropping rapidly now, as it can in the desert at night. I pulled my jacket tighter and continued working, though I found myself increasingly distracted by that sound, that almost language carried on the wind. I decided to move to a higher dune for a different perspective. Packing my tripod and camera into my backpack, I began to climb the nearest tall dune. The sand shifted beneath my feet, making the ascent 2 steps up, 1 sliding back. But I was used to this, had the right technique. The wind was stronger at the crest, carrying more sand with it. I narrowed my eyes against the fine particles and surveyed my surroundings. And that's when I saw it. Something in the moonlight that shouldn't have been there. A structure, gleaming white like the sand, but solid, geometric, clearly not natural. I checked my map, confused. There were no marked structures in this part of the park. No ruins, no abandoned buildings, nothing. Just dunes. Had I somehow strayed from my permitted area, become disoriented in the identical landscape? The wind seemed to whisper more urgently now, the almost words more distinct. Calling, beckoning. I should have returned to my tent, should have waited for daylight. But professional curiosity won out over caution. This was something unexpected, unusual, potentially a unique photographic opportunity. I repacked my equipment and began making my way toward the mysterious structure. It was further than it appeared, a common optical illusion in the desert. What I thought might be a 15-minute walk took nearly an hour. The wind continued to strengthen. The temperature continued to drop. I pulled up the collar of my jacket and pressed on. As I grew closer, details became clearer. It wasn't a building as I first thought, but a series of white stone pillars arranged in a perfect circle. Each stood perhaps 3 meters high, slightly tapered toward the top. They appeared to be made of the same gypsum as the surrounding sand, but solid, sculpted. An art installation, perhaps? Some kind of official park monument I'd somehow not heard about, but there were no signs, no markers, no indications of official sanction. I entered the circle cautiously. The wind was peculiar here, still strong, but somehow contained, circular. The sand it carried whirled around the inside of a stone circle. creating a miniature sandstorm that reached perhaps halfway up the pillars before dispersing. In the moonlight, it looked like a slowly revolving white curtain. And the sound was definitely coming from here, from the sand itself, from the motion of the particles as they whirled through the air. Not just random noise, but patterns, cadences, inflections, like a language I couldn't quite grasp but could almost understand. I set up my tripod in the center of the circle and began taking photographs. The technical challenges were significant. The swirling sand, the contrast of moonlight on white stone, the need for long exposures without camera shake despite the wind. But I was in my element, adjusting settings, trying different angles. Time slipped away from me. I was vaguely aware that it was getting colder, that the wind was strengthening further, that the sand was now whirling higher around the pillars. But I was getting remarkable images, ghostly, ethereal shots of white sand streaming around white stone in the silver moonlight. It wasn't until I looked at my watch, 3:17 a.m., that I realized how late it had become. I should head back to my camp. But as I began to pack up my equipment, I noticed something had changed. The sand wasn't just swirling randomly anymore. It was forming shapes, patterns, human-like figures made of whirling white particles, appearing and dissolving in continuous motion. I froze, camera still in my hands, watching as these sand figures became more defined, more persistent. Dancing? No, not dancing. Emerging, trying to emerge the sand into something else, something more solid. And the sound had changed too. The almost language was clearer now, less like the random noise of wind and sand, more like actual words. Still in no language I recognized, but unmistakably communication, repeating the same phrases over and over, with increasing urgency. I should have run. Should have fled immediately, but professional instinct took over one last time. I raised my camera, focused on the most well-defined of the sand figures, and pressed the shutter release. The moment I did, everything stopped. The wind died instantly. The swirling sand hung suspended in the air for an impossible moment, then fell straight down, landing with a softness on the ground. The silence that followed was absolute, suffocating. All the sand figures had disappeared, except one, the one I had photographed. It remained, floating in the air before me, no longer made of swirling particles, but somehow solid now. Smooth white skin like polished gypsum. A humanoid figure, but wrong in proportions. Limbs too long, neck too thin, head too large and oddly shaped. And it had no face, just a smooth, white, featureless oval, until it did, a mouth open. Not like a human mouth with lips and teeth, but a simple horizontal split in the smooth face, and from it came words. Clear now, English, but strangely accented, as if the speaker had learned the language from books rather than people. You have given me form, it said. I am grateful. My camera slipped from my numb fingers, landing with a soft thud on the sand. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. So long. The figure continued, its voice a dry whisper like sand sliding over stone. So long we have waited for someone to see, to record, to make real. What are you? I finally managed to ask. The figure tilted its head at an impossible angle, the neck bending nearly 90 degrees. We are the forgotten, the erased, those who dwelled here before the sand came, before this place was death and emptiness. It moved closer to me, floating rather than walking, its two long arms hanging motionless at its sides. This was our home, green, alive, before the great thirst came, before the earth turned white and sterile. I backed away, but hit one of the stone pillars. The figure continued its approach. But we learned to persist, it said. to exist in the spaces between grains of sand, in the wind, in the light, formless, voiceless, waiting. It was directly in front of me now, its blank-faced centimeters from mine. And now you have given me form again, with your seeing device, with your belief. My camera? I whispered, understanding beginning to dawn. My photograph? Yes, it said. To be seen is to exist. To be recorded is to become real. A cold that had nothing to do with the desert night seeped into my bones. What do you want? The figure's head tilted to the other side. To live again, to have substance, to reclaim what was taken. I don't understand. Your form, it said simply. Your substance. Your life. Its arms finally moved, reaching for me with fingers too numerous and too long. I tried to run, to duck away, but my body wouldn't respond, paralyzed with terror, so profound it shut down all physical response. The fingers touched my face, cold as night sand, dry as ancient bone, and where they touched, I felt a curious sensation, not pain but absence, numbness, as if pieces of me were simply ceasing to be. Your essence sustains my form, the figure whispered. A fair exchange, is it not? You have lived your one small life. We have waited centuries for ours to resume. I found my voice, found my ability to move. I twisted away from those terrible fingers and ran with no direction, no purpose other than to put distance between myself and that thing that I had somehow given life to with my camera. I ran blindly through the dunes, stumbling, falling, rising again. The moonlight that had seemed so beautiful earlier now cast deceptive shadows, created illusory paths that led nowhere. And all around me, the wind was rising again, bringing with it that sound, that almost language, now recognizable words. Return, return, return. I don't know how long I ran. How far? The white landscape offered no landmarks, no sense of progress. But eventually, I collapsed, my lungs burning, my legs unable to carry me another step. And as I lay there on the cool sand, gasping for breath, I became aware that I was not alone. All around me, the sand was moving, rising, forming shapes. Not just one this time. Dozens, hundreds, an entire civilization of sand people rising from the dunes, their featureless faces all turned toward me. You have broken the seal, said a chorus of dry, whispering voices. You have opened the way. All of us will return now. All of us will live again. They began to approach, a circle of white figures closing in on me. I tried to crawl away, but there was nowhere to go, no escape. Then, through the ranks of advancing figures, I saw something. A flicker of yellow-white light on the horizon, different from the silver moonlight. Warmer, brighter. Dawn was approaching. The sand figures saw it too. A ripple of agitation passed through their ranks. Quick, the chorus of voices urged. Before the sun rises, before we are forced back into formlessness. They rushed toward me all at once, a wave of white gypsum flesh. I closed my eyes, covered my face with my arms in a futile gesture of protection, but the expected impact never came. Instead, I heard a sound like a tremendous sigh, the sound of 1,000 voices exhaling in unison. Then silence. I looked up cautiously. The figures were gone. The wind had died completely. The sand lay still and innocuous under the fading moonlight, and on the eastern horizon, the sky was lightening from black to deep blue to pale gold. I sat there, trembling, until full daylight illuminated the dunes. In the harsh light of morning, there was no sign of what I'd experienced. No stone circle, no strange figures, just endless white dunes, pristine and empty, I made my way back to my camp eventually, following my own footprints where they still remain, using the GPS function on my phone where the wind had erased my trail. My tent stood undisturbed, my supplies untouched. I packed quickly, abandoning non-essential items in my haste to leave that place. I still had my camera, still had the memory card with the photographs I had taken. Part of me wanted to destroy it immediately, to smash the camera and crush the card to powder. But the professional in me, the artist, the documentarian, couldn't do it. I waited until I was safely back in my hotel room in Alamogordo, the door locked, the curtains drawn against the harsh New Mexico sun. Only then did I connect my camera to my laptop and download the images. Most were as expected. Beautiful shots of moonlit dunes, the play of light and shadow across the rippled sand. But the last ones, the ones taken in that strange stone circle, there was nothing, just blurry white frames, overexposed or out of focus, except for one, the last photograph I'd taken, the one of the sand figure that had become solid. The image was clear, detailed, and completely empty. Just a shot of the interior of the stone circle, the sand swirling in the wind. Nothing else. No figure. No entity. Nothing suggests that what I'd experienced had been anything but a hallucination brought on by exhaustion, cold, and the disorienting effects of the moonlit desert. I might have convinced myself of that. Might have written off the entire experience as a waking nightmare. Except for one thing. When I looked in the bathroom mirror after my shower that evening, I noticed something strange about my reflection. My face seemed incomplete somehow, as if certain details had been erased. The scar on my left cheek from a childhood accident, gone. The slight asymmetry of my eyes, corrected. The gray in my beard reverted to solid brown. Small things, things only I would notice. But real changes. And sometimes, when I turn my head quickly, I catch something in my peripheral vision, a flicker of movement that shouldn't be there. A tall, thin, white figure standing just out of direct sight. Gone when I look directly at it. I've sold my camera equipment, abandoned photography entirely, moved to a place far from deserts, from open spaces, from wind and sand and the secrets they contain. But it doesn't matter, because here's the truth I've come to understand. They're everywhere now. Released, freed, no longer confined to white sands. They travel on the wind, in dust motes, in the fine particles that float through every environment on Earth. And they're patient, so patient, waiting for night, waiting for their chance to become real again, to take from us what they need to live. I see them sometimes, flickers at the edge of vision, white figures standing in corners, in shadows, behind trees, watching, waiting. And I know that one night, the one that took something from me in the dunes will return to take the rest. The rain is soothing, isn't it? It clears the air, washes away dust, keeps them at bay for a little while. But rain eventually stops. The air eventually dries. And when it does, tell me, have you noticed any small changes in your appearance lately? Any subtle differences when you look in the mirror? Any details that seem missing? No? Are you certain? Look again. Look very carefully. Because once you notice them, once you acknowledge their existence, you've opened the door, just as I did with my camera, in those white dunes under the moonlight. And they're so very, very patient. The rain's quite soothing against your window, isn't it? That gentle, persistent patter. Almost like static on old radio. White noise to lull you to sleep. I envy you that comfort. I haven't slept well since my visit to New Mexico. Since that night near Pie Town. Since I heard what came through on that old radio tower. Have you ever driven across the plains of San Agustin? It's a vast expanse in western New Mexico, High desert plateau surrounded by mountains. Beautiful during the day in that stark, desolate way. But at night it becomes something else entirely. Especially when you're alone, with nothing but starlight and the beam of your headlights cutting through the darkness. I was on a road trip, driving cross-country to visit my sister in Arizona. Nothing remarkable about it, just me, my car, and the open road. I'd planned my route carefully, expected to make it to Springerville before stopping for the night. But you know what they say about best-laid plans. My car started making an unsettling noise somewhere east of Socorro, a rhythmic knocking from under the bonnet that grew progressively louder. Being stranded in the New Mexico desert at night wasn't on my itinerary, so I decided to find the nearest settlement and look for a mechanic. My map showed a place called Pie Town on Route 60. Barely a town, really. Just a cluster of buildings named after the pies once sold to travelers along the old highway. But it would have to do. The knocking grew worse as I turned onto Route 60. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the landscape. I remember checking my watch. 6:47 p.m. Still enough daylight to find help, I hoped. About 10 miles east of Pie Town, the knocking became a grinding, and then my engine simply died. I coasted the side of the road, the sudden silence after hours of driving almost disorientating. I tried the ignition. Nothing, not even a click. I checked my phone. No service. Of course. I was considering my options when I noticed a structure on the horizon, tall and skeletal against the darkening sky. A radio tower. Where there's a radio tower, there's usually some kind of facility, perhaps someone who could help. It looked to be about a mile across the open desert. With daylight fading fast, I decided to hike there rather than wait on the empty highway. I grabbed my torch, water bottle, and a light jacket from my luggage, locked the car, and set off across the scrubland toward the tower. The walk was more difficult than I'd anticipated. What had appeared to be relatively flat terrain turned out to be a maze of shallow arroyos and rocky outcroppings. The tower seemed to remain stubbornly distant despite my progress. And the light was failing faster than I'd expected, the vast New Mexico sky turning from blue to purple to a deep, star-studded black. I switched on my torch as darkness fell completely. Its beams seemed feeble in the immense darkness, illuminating just a small patch of ground ahead of me. The radio tower was now just a darker silhouette against the night sky, its red warning light blinking rhythmically. I must have been about halfway to the tower when I first noticed a sound, a low humming just at the edge of hearing. I paused, listening. It seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once, a vibration more felt than heard. I assumed it was related to the tower, some kind of electrical equipment. As I continued walking, the humming grew louder, resolved into a more complex sound, like voices, hundreds of voices, all speaking simultaneously, but too distant to make out words. Radio signals, I thought, somehow being picked up not by a receiver, but by the very air around me. It should have been my first warning. But curiosity has always been my weakness. The tower loomed larger as I approached, far taller than it had appeared from the highway, and older. The structure was rusted, the paint peeling, the warning light at the top flickering erratically now rather than blinking steadily. This was no modern communications tower, but something from an earlier era, massive and overbuilt, with a complexity of struts and supports rarely seen in contemporary designs. At its base stood a small concrete building, windowless, with a heavy metal door. No light showed from within or without, aside from the failing red beacon at the tower's pinnacle. The voices were clearer now, still indistinct, still overlapping, but definitely human speech. Fragments of conversations, snippets of songs, bursts of laughter, like someone rapidly turning the dial on a radio, catching moments of different broadcasts. I approached the concrete building, my torch beam playing over its surface. No signs, no markings of any kind. Just weathered concrete and that imposing door. Hello? I called out. Is anyone there? My car is broken down on the highway. I need help. The voices stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the ambient sound of the desert night, the whisper of wind, the distant cry of coyotes, seemed to have been sucked into a vacuum of complete acoustic absence. Then a new sound, the metallic groan of the door's hinges as it swung slowly open. No one appeared in the doorway, just darkness beyond, deeper than the night around me. Hello? I called again, my voice sounding thin and weak even to my own ears. I directed my torch beam through the doorway. It revealed a small room with concrete walls. Empty, except for an ancient radio console against the far wall, vacuum tubes, Bakelite knobs, analog dials. Technology from the 1940s or 50s. It appeared to be operational. Lights flickered on its control panel. Dials twitched, meters fluctuated. But there was no one there. No operator. No engineer. No one who could have opened the door. I should have left then. Should have turned around and taken my chances on the highway. But the night was cold, the walk back long, and the unlikelihood of another car passing before morning was becoming evident. And there was that damn curiosity again, pulling me toward the ancient radio equipment. I stepped inside. The door closed behind me with a definitive click. I spun around, heart suddenly pounding, and grasped the handle. Locked. Of course it was locked. Hey! I shouted, rattling the door. Is someone there? Open the door. No response. Just a gentle hum of the radio equipment behind me. Warming up, coming to life, I turned slowly back to face the console. The dials were moving on their own now, tuning to different frequencies. The meters jumped and fell, and from the ancient speaker mounted above the console came voices again, clearer now, as if the signal were strengthening. Lost in the hills outside Santa Fe. Never found the body, though they searched for weeks. Said they heard screaming, but by the time they got there, fragments of conversations, stories, accounts of disappearances, accidents, unexplained events, all across New Mexico. The voices overlapped, male and female, young and old, but all with the same flat, emotionless delivery, like newsreaders describing traffic incidents. Except these weren't traffic reports. Skin was completely gone, but no blood. Eyes were open, staring at something only he could see. Wrote the same words over and over into her hand cramped into a claw. I backed away from the console until I hit the locked door. The voices continued, an endless litany of horror and mystery, and beneath them, growing louder, a different sound. A carrier wave, a signal, building in intensity. The room grew colder. My breath fogged in the air. The concrete walls seemed to recede, the room expanding impossibly. The radio console now distant, but the sound from its speaker no less clear. And then a new voice cut through all the others. Deeper, older somehow, speaking not English, but something that slithered and hissed and clicked. The dials on the console spun wildly. The meters pinned at their maximum readings. The vacuum tubes glowed brighter, impossibly bright, filling the room with a harsh electronic light that cast no shadows. The alien voice rose in volume and intensity, and though I couldn't understand the words, I understood the intent. It was calling, summoning, opening a door not meant to be opened. The air in the center of the room began to distort, to ripple and fold in on itself, like fabric being bunched by invisible hands. A darkness formed within the distortion. Not the absence of light, but something more fundamental, a negation of space itself. And from that negation emerged something, a shape that hurt my eyes to look upon, that seemed to exist in more dimensions than our reality permits. a form that shifted and changed even as I tried to comprehend it. Limbs that weren't limbs, sensory organs that weren't eyes or ears, but something else entirely. Movement that wasn't movement, but transition between states of being. The alien voice from the speaker rose to a crescendo, and the thing in the center of the room responded, not with sound, but with a psychic pressure that made my ears pop and my sinuses ache. A communication beyond human perception, yet undeniably present. I was witnessing a conversation between the voice on the radio and this visitor, this entity summoned through technology meant for much more mundane transmissions. Through my terror, a thought surfaced. This wasn't the first time. This ancient radio tower, positioned in one of the most remote parts of New Mexico, had been built for this very purpose, to call across. What? Space? Time? Dimensions? To establish communication with something that could not exist in our reality. The entity turned its attention to me. I felt its focus like a physical weight, pressing me against the door. It had no eyes, but I knew it was seeing me. It had no mind as we understand it, but was thinking about me, considering me. The voice on the radio changed, shifted to heavily accented English. Observer, it said. Witness, you should not be here. I couldn't speak, could barely breathe under the psychic pressure of the entity's attention. The alignment is imperfect. The voice continued. The gateway unstable. Your presence complicates. The entity moved toward me, or expanded or flowed, or all these at once. Its impossible geometries filled more of the room, more of my perception. The pain in my head intensified. I tasted metal, smelled ozone, felt static electricity raising the hair on my arms. You will be required. The voice said, a vessel, a conduit. The imperfection must be balanced. The entity reached for me with appendages that weren't there, then weren't again. I screamed, a sound lost in the rising howl of the radio's carrier wave. I pressed myself harder against the door, as if I could somehow pass through it by force of terror alone. And suddenly, the door gave way. It swung open, and I fell backward into the cold night air. I scrambled away on all fours, not looking back, not daring to see if the entity was following. When I finally found the courage to turn around, the concrete building stood as before, door closed, silent, unremarkable except for that red light still weakly pulsing at the top of the tower above it. But something had changed. The stars, which had been so bright and clear in the desert sky, were now obscured. Clouds had rolled in thick and heavy, and from those clouds came the first drops of rain. I ran across the desert, heedless of the rough terrain, driven by a terror beyond reason. The rain intensified, became a downpour. I was soaked through in minutes, chilled to the bone, but grateful for the curtain of water that perhaps, though I had no reason to believe this, might shield me from whatever had emerged in that radio room. I reached the highway as thunder began to roll across the plains. My car sat where I'd left it, dark and silent in the rain. I fumbled with my keys, hands shaking so badly I could barely fit them into the lock. Once inside, I tried the ignition again, acting on instinct rather than hope. The engine started immediately. No knocking, no grinding, no hesitation. As if there had never been a problem. I drove through the deluge, through the night, not stopping until I reached Springerville hours later. I checked into the first motel I found, fell into bed still in my damp clothes, and passed out from exhaustion and lingering terror. The next morning was clear and bright, as if the storm had never happened. I might have convinced myself it was all a nightmare, a hallucination brought on by stress and exhaustion, except for three things. First, my clothes were still damp. Second, when I tried to call my sister to tell her I'd be arriving later than planned, I found that my phone no longer worked. not just no service. It wouldn't power on at all. When I eventually took it to a repair shop in Phoenix, the technician told me every electronic component had been fried, as if it had been subjected to an intense electromagnetic pulse. And third, the voice on the radio, the one that spoke of vessels and conduits, sometimes speaks to me in dreams, shows me things no human was meant to see, places beyond our universe, entities waiting to enter. They're coming, you see. They found a way through that old radio tower and others like it, scattered across remote places in the American Southwest. They're not for communication as we understand it. They're gateways, beacons, lighthouses guiding something home. The rain helps, though. They can't come through when it's raining. Something about the water, the electrical conductivity perhaps, disrupts the signal, weakens the connection. That's why I moved to Seattle. Why I sleep better when storms roll in off the Pacific. So listen to that rain outside your window. Be grateful for it. Pray it doesn't stop. Because if it does, if the sky clears and the night grows still, turn off your radios. Unplug your televisions. Power down your phones. Every electronic device is a potential receiver, a potential gateway. Smaller than that old tower in the desert. More limited in range and power, but open nonetheless. They're speaking right now, transmitting their signals across the void, searching for receivers, searching for vessels, searching for you. Can you hear them? In the static between stations? In the buzz of fluorescent lights? In the hum of your computer's fan? That's not just noise. It's a voice. It's calling your name. But it's still raining. You're still safe. For now, pray the rain doesn't stop. That rain sounds lovely against your window, doesn't it? Gentle, rhythmic, safe. I find myself listening for patterns in it these days. Messages, perhaps, warnings. Ever since that night in Cimarron Canyon, in the abandoned mine, in the depths where the earth speaks in whispers and screams. Have you ever been to northern New Mexico? The mountains there are different from the southern deserts. Pine forests, alpine meadows, rushing streams. Beautiful country, pristine, or so it seems on the surface. But there are scars beneath that beauty. Old wounds in the earth where men once dug for silver, gold, copper. Tunnels stretching into darkness. Places where the boundary between our world and something else grows thin. I was a geology student back then, working on my doctoral thesis, studying mineralization patterns in abandoned mines across the Southwest. Unglamorous work, perhaps, but fascinating to me, crawling through forgotten tunnels, documenting our veins, collecting samples, piecing together the story of how volcanic activity millions of years ago created deposits of precious metals that would eventually draw prospectors to these remote mountains. Cimarron Canyon was to be my final research site before returning to university. A small, largely forgotten silver mine that had operated briefly in the 1880s before being abandoned. The literature suggested some unusual mineral formations there, worth investigating, but not significant enough to have attracted much academic attention. I arrived in early autumn. The aspen leaves were just beginning to turn, splashes of gold among the dark green pines. I set up camp near the mine entrance, a simple tent, a camp stove, basic supplies. I'd done this dozens of times before. I was well prepared, cautious, experienced. The mine entrance was partially collapsed, as expected. Most of these old diggings have suffered some degree of cave-in over the decades, but there was still a navigable opening, reinforced with timber supports that had somehow survived over a century of mountain winters. I spent the first day conducting a preliminary survey, checking the stability of the entrance, testing for hazardous gases, mapping what I could see of the initial tunnel. Everything seemed normal, safe, as far as any abandoned mine can be safe. I planned to begin my detailed work the following morning. That night, it rained. A gentle autumn shower that pattered against my tent, lulling me to sleep. But sometime after midnight, I woke suddenly, completely alert, not from any sound or disturbance. Simply awake, as if something had called my name. I lay in my sleeping bag, listening to the rain, and beneath it, something else. A sound coming from the direction of the mind. A low, pulsing hum, almost like machinery, but more organic, rhythmic, like a heartbeat, but too slow, much too slow. I checked my watch, 2:17 a.m., too early to start the day's work. But I knew from experience I wouldn't fall back asleep with that sound nagging at my curiosity. I dressed, donned my rain gear, and stepped outside. The night was surprisingly dark. Cloudy, of course, with the rain, but darker than it should have been, as if the blackness had weight and substance beyond the mere absence of light. My headlamp cut a weak cone through it, illuminating the path to the mine entrance. The humming was definitely coming from inside, louder now that I was outside, but still not loud. A vibration as much as a sound. I approached cautiously, playing my light over the timber supports, looking for signs of recent movement or instability. Everything appeared as I'd left it. I hesitated at the entrance. Night exploration wasn't on my agenda. It violated basic safety protocols. But that sound, it was like nothing I'd ever heard in a mine before. Nothing I'd ever heard anywhere. Professional curiosity won out over caution. I ducked under the rotting timbers and entered the main shaft. The air inside was different from what I documented earlier. Cooler, yes, that was expected, but also charged somehow, the way the air feels before a lightning strike. My skin prickled beneath my clothes. The beam of my headlamp seemed to penetrate less deeply, as if the darkness had become more resistant to light. The humming led me forward, down the main shaft, past the point where I'd stopped my preliminary survey. The tunnel began to slope downward more steeply. According to the historical records, this mine had only a single level, unusual, but not unheard of for a small operation that had closed quickly. But this shaft was clearly descending to what would be a second level, one that wasn't documented. The timbers grew more closely spaced as I descended, the ceiling lower, forcing me to crouch. Water trickled down the walls, not unusual in a mine during rainfall, but this water, it glistened oddly in my lamplight, seemed to move with more purpose than mere gravity would dictate. The humming grew louder, resolved itself into something more complex, not machinery, not geological settling or water movement. It was, yes, I was certain now, a voice or voices, chanting in a language I'd never heard. Low, rhythmic, with consonants that seemed to catch on the edge of comprehension before sliding away into incomprehensibility. I should have turned back then, should have retreated to my tent, packed up at first light, and left this place to its secrets. But I didn't. I continued downward, driven by that damnable academic curiosity that has been both the glory and the downfall of so many in my profession. The shaft leveled out eventually, opening into a chamber that shouldn't have existed, a perfect circle, perhaps 30 feet in diameter, with a ceiling so high my headlamp couldn't illuminate it. The walls were smooth, impossibly smooth for 19th century mining techniques. And embedded in those walls, catching the light of my lamp and throwing it back in prismatic bursts, were crystals, not the quartz or calcite formations common in these mountains, but something I'd never seen before, something that seemed to shift color as I moved. The chanting was coming from everywhere now, from the walls themselves, from the crystals, from the very air. I stood transfixed, my scientific mind racing to categorize, to understand what I was seeing and hearing. Some previously undocumented mineral formation with unusual acoustic properties, perhaps? Some trick of the mind's geometry that amplified and distorted distant sounds? But in my heart, I knew better. This place had never been made by silver miners with pickaxes and dynamite. This chamber was older, much older, and it had been waiting. In the center of the circular floor was a depression, a shallow basin perhaps 6 feet across, filled with what looked like water, but water that didn't quite behave as water should. It moved against the subtle slant of the floor, formed patterns, spirals, whirls, complex geometric shapes that formed and dissolved and reformed in rhythm with the chanting. I approached slowly, my academic detachment warring with a growing sense of wrongness, of danger. The chanting intensified as I neared the basin. The crystals in the walls pulsed brighter. The air grew thick, hard to breathe. I stopped at the edge of the basin and directed my light into the liquid. It wasn't water. It was too viscous, too opalescent, and within it, shapes moved. Indistinct at first, then with growing clarity as they rose toward the surface. Faces, human faces, dozens of them, pressing upward as if against a membrane, mouths open in silent screams or ecstatic rapture. It was impossible to tell which. I recoiled, nearly losing my balance. The chanting reached a crescendo. The faces in the liquid surged upward, stretching their prison but not breaking through. Not yet. And then a new voice spoke, not from the walls or the crystals or the faces in the basin. From behind me, "You should not be here, geologist. Not yet. It's not your time." I turned slowly. A figure stood at the entrance to the chamber, human in general outline, but wrong in its proportions. Too tall, too thin, its limbs at subtle angles that human joints shouldn't permit. It wore what might have been the remnants of prospector's clothing, a long coat, work pants, boots, but all in such a state of decay that they seemed more like a memory of clothing than actual fabric. Its face, I try not to remember its face. Mostly human, yes, but with too many features, as if multiple faces had been pressed together, imperfectly blended, multiple sets of eyes, all focusing on me with terrible intelligence. Multiple mouths that moved in unison as it spoke again. You seek knowledge of what lies beneath, of the bones of the earth. But some knowledge is not meant for your kind. Some secret should remain buried. My scientific mind was shutting down, overwhelmed by what I was seeing. But some part of me, some stubborn core, still reached for a rational explanation. What is this place? I managed to ask. "Who are you?" The figure tilted its composite head, a gesture of curious consideration. "This place is a threshold, a door, one of many scattered across your world. And I am its keeper, its guardian, until the alignment comes again, until the way opens fully." It gestured toward the basin with one impossibly long arm. "They came seeking wealth, metal from the earth's blood. They found something else, something older than their comprehension. They heard our call, answered it, became part of us." The faces in the basin grew more agitated, pressing harder against the surface of the strange liquid. The chanting from the walls grew louder, more urgent. "The time approaches," the figure said. "The door thins. They will return. All who have become part of us will walk again." "I don't understand," I said, finding my voice despite the fear constricting my throat. "What alignment? What door?" The figure moved closer. Its movement was wrong, not walking so much as flowing, though its feet seemed to touch the ground. "Your people have such limited perception. 3 dimensions, linear time. You cannot see the geometries that exist beyond your senses, the folds in reality where other planes intersect with your own." It was only a few feet away from me now. I could smell it, an odor of earth and metal and something else, something chemical and organic at once, something ancient. For brief moments, when the stars align correctly, when the Earth's magnetic fields fluctuate in precise patterns, the barriers grow thin, permeable, and we, who have waited in the spaces between, can pass through, can return to physical form, can walk your world again, as we did eons before your kind evolved from lesser beasts. The chanting reached a fever pitch. The crystals in the walls pulsed so brightly they hurt my eyes. The liquid in the basin began to roil and bubble. The faces now pressing so hard against its surface that features distorted became monstrous. The alignment is not yet complete, the figure said. The door is not fully open, but soon, so very soon, it reached for me with those two long fingers. You should not be here, geologist, but since you are, perhaps you can serve a purpose. Perhaps you can carry a message, a warning, or an invitation. I backed away, but there was nowhere to go. The basin was behind me, the horror-filled liquid lapping at the edges now, threatening to spill over. Please, I said, a scholar reduced to begging. I just want to leave. I won't tell anyone. I'll seal the entrance. No one will ever come here again. The figure's many mouths smiled in unison. Oh, but you will tell. You must tell that it is your purpose now to speak of what you've seen, to prepare the way, to make them listen. Its hand touched my forehead. The fingers were cold as deep earth, hard as metal, burning like acid. I screamed, dropping to my knees as pain lanced through my skull. Images flooded my mind. Cities older than human civilization, beings that defied description, geometries that couldn't exist in our reality, knowledge that human minds weren't structured contained. Carry our message, the figure said, its voice now inside my head as well as in the chamber. Tell them we are returning. Tell them the doors are opening. Tell them the time of reunion is at hand. Its hand withdrew. The pain subsided to a throbbing ache. The chamber was spinning around me. The chanting now, so loud it seemed to vibrate the very stones. Go now, the figure said, while you still can, while the alignment is still imperfect. The rain weakens connection, disrupts the harmonics. But when the skies clear, when the stars align, we will complete what began here a century ago. What began millennia before that? The reconciliation of worlds. I ran, blindly, desperately, driven by terror beyond any I'd ever known. Up the sloping shaft, tripping, falling, scrambling on hands and knees when the ceiling grew too low. Behind me, the chanting followed. The strange light from those crystals seemed to pursue me, casting my shadow ahead of me. A shadow that didn't quite move as I did, that seemed to have extra limbs, extra features. The rain was falling harder when I burst from the mine entrance. Clean, normal, blessed rain. I ran through it to my tent, threw my essential belongings into my backpack, and fled into the night. I didn't stop until I reached my car, parked miles away at the canyon trailhead. Didn't stop driving until the sun rose over the plains of eastern New Mexico. I never returned to the university, never completed my thesis, never explained to my professors or family why I had abandoned a promising academic career. How could I explain what I'd seen, what I'd learned? They would have thought me mad. Perhaps I am, but I remember everything the entity showed me. Everything it burned into my mind with its touch. The knowledge of what waits in the spaces between worlds. Of what seeks to return. Of the gates scattered across the earth. Mines, caves, wells, certain ancient structures, where the boundaries are thinnest. And I remember its final message. The one it commanded me to deliver. The warning, or invitation. They are returning. The doors are opening. The time of reunion is at hand. I've traveled since then, restlessly, never staying in one place too long, always moving, as if I could somehow outrun the knowledge in my head, the memories, The visions that come in dreams, and sometimes when I'm awake. I gravitate to places where it rains frequently. Seattle, London, Vancouver. The constant moisture seems to dampen the connection, weaken the signal, like static on a phone line, making the voice on the other end harder to hear. The voice that still speaks to me sometimes, especially when the skies are clear and the stars bright. But no amount of rain can wash away what I know, what I was shown, what's coming. They're returning, not just to that mine in Cimarron Canyon, but to all the gates, all the thresholds around the world. People are finding these places, experiencing things they can't explain, receiving the message piece by piece, fragment by fragment, a global puzzle assembling itself in the collective unconscious. The rain is soothing, isn't it? Cleansing, protective, but it can't rain forever. Eventually, the skies will clear, the stars will align, the doors will open fully, and they will walk among us again. Listen closely now, not to my voice, not to the rain. Listen to the silence between the raindrops, the spaces, the pauses. Can you hear it? That faint rhythmic chanting? That's them, calling, waiting, preparing. They have a message for you too, a personal invitation. They're so eager to meet you, to show you what they showed me, to welcome you into their reconciliation of worlds. But for now, pray for rain. Constant, cleansing rain. It won't save you in the end, but it might delay the inevitable for a little while longer, just a little while longer. If you're still with us, tucked beneath a blanket or sitting by the dim glow of a campfire screen, I have a little question for you. Where are you listening from right now, and what time is it? I'm genuinely curious to know. Are you walking through misty woods? Lying in bed with the rain tapping at your window? Or maybe huddled around your own imaginary campfire? Drop a comment and let me know your current location and time. Not only does it help me see who's still with us after those creepy tales, but it brings our little community of nighttime story seekers just a bit closer. And hey, if you're still awake after that last story, you're braver than most. The rain is quite hypnotic, isn't it? The way it drums against your window, creating patterns that almost sound like words if you listen long enough. I find myself grateful for it these days, for the barrier it creates, for the way it washes away certain things, certain marks, certain messages that shouldn't be read. Would you like to hear about the petroglyphs? About what happened to me at Three Rivers? It might help you understand why I find such comfort in the sound of rainfall now. Why I moved to a place where the skies weep almost daily. I was an anthropology professor, specializing in prehistoric Native American art, rock carvings, cave paintings, pictographs, the silent communications left by ancient peoples across the landscapes of North America. I'd spent decades documenting these sites, attempting to decipher their meanings, to understand the worldview of cultures separated from us by thousands of years. Three Rivers Petroglyph site in southern New Mexico was nothing new to me. I'd visited many times over the years, had published several papers on the more than 21,000 glyphs found there. Remarkable examples of Ornata Mogollon rock art, created between 900 and 1400 CE. Geometric patterns, animals, human figures, celestial objects, a complex symbolic language left on the volcanic boulders scattered across that windswept ridge. But on this particular visit, I had a specific purpose. I was testing a new digital imaging technology that could reveal markings invisible to the naked eye, petroglyphs that had faded over centuries of exposure to the elements, or that had been deliberately obscured by later artists. A kind of palimpsest of stone, with layers of meaning etched one over another. I arranged to stay after the park closed to visitors. The site superintendent was a former student of mine, happy to grant me special access for my research. I would camp overnight, using the evening and early morning hours when the light was oblique to capture my images. Just be careful out here alone, Dr. Harrison. My former student warned as she prepared to leave. We've had some strange occurrences lately. Equipment malfunction, unusual animal behavior. Nothing I haven't dealt with before, Sarah. I assured her. I've been alone at sites far more remote than this. She hesitated, then added, some of the Mescalero Apache from the reservation have been concerned about this place recently. Said there's been a disturbance, that something is waking up. I smiled indulgently. I'd heard similar stories throughout my career. Indigenous concerns about sacred sites were to be respected, certainly, but I'd learned to separate cultural beliefs from archaeological fact. I'll be respectful and careful, I promise. Just one night of photography, and I'll be gone by noon tomorrow. The sun was already low when Sarah left, casting long shadows that made the petroglyphs stand out in sharp relief. Perfect conditions for my work. I set up my equipment, tripod, camera, specialized lights, laptop, and began documenting a section of boulders that previous research suggested contained multiple layers of carvings. The technology worked beautifully. My camera's special filters, combined with the software on my laptop, revealed hidden markings beneath and between the visible glyphs, patterns that connected seemingly unrelated symbols, lines that completed partial images. It was as if I was seeing the complete text of a book, when before I'd only been able to make out random pages. I was so absorbed in my discoveries that I barely noticed the sun disappearing behind the San Andres Mountains to the west. Twilight deepened the shadows around me, but my equipment provided ample illumination for continued work. The temperature dropped rapidly, as it often does in the desert. I pulled on a jacket and kept going. It must have been around 10 p.m. when I first noticed a change. A subtle shift in the wind direction, accompanied by a drop in barometric pressure that made my ears pop. Storm coming, I thought, though no rain had been forecast. I glanced up at the sky, stars still visible overhead, but to the east, clouds were building, dark, heavy forms silhouetted against the night sky. I returned to my work with increased urgency. If rain was indeed approaching, I'd need to protect my equipment. The newly revealed patterns were fascinating, more geometric, more precise than the visible glyphs, and more directional. They seemed to create paths across the rocks, leading from one boulder to another, following an unmistakable logic that had been invisible to decades of researchers, myself included. I began to follow one of these paths, moving my equipment from rock to rock, uncovering more hidden connections. The pattern led me away from the main concentration of petroglyphs, toward a section of the site I'd never considered particularly significant, just scattered boulders with simple, isolated carvings. But my imaging technology revealed something else entirely. The scattered symbols were anchor points in a vast, interconnected design that stretched across the entire ridge, a pattern that became visible only when you knew what to look for, a pattern that, from my new perspective, seemed to converge at a large, flat-top boulder at the edge of the site. The wind was stronger now. The clouds had covered half the sky, obscuring the stars. In the distance, I heard the faint rumble of thunder, but I couldn't stop now. I was on the verge of a major discovery, something that would rewrite our understanding of Jornada Mogollon symbolic systems. I reached a flat-top boulder as the first lightning flashed in the eastern sky. In ordinary light, it bore only a few simple spiral petroglyphs, common symbols found throughout the Southwest. But when I set up my equipment and ran the imaging software, the rock's surface transformed before my eyes. The spirals were the center of an intricate circular design that covered the entire top surface of the boulder, a perfect mandala of interlocking geometric forms, astronomical symbols, and what appeared to be a form of writing I had never encountered before. characters that resembled no indigenous script I knew of, yet were unmistakably deliberate, structured. I blinked, certain it was a trick of light, an artifact of my imaging system. But no, the symbols were shifting subtly, rotating around the central spirals like the mechanism of some vast clock. The movement was almost imperceptible, but undeniably real. Another flash of lightning, closer now. The air felt charged, heavy with the approaching storm, but also with something else. A presence, a watchfulness that prickled the hairs on the back of my neck. I looked up from my equipment, scanning the darkness beyond the pool of light created by my lamps. Nothing visible, just wind-shaped junipers and the scattered boulders. But the feeling of being observed, of being evaluated, intensified. "Hello?" I called, my voice sounding thin against the rising wind. "Is someone there?" No response. Just another rumble of thunder. Closer now. I turned back to my work. Tried to dismiss the sensation as the product of isolation and fatigue. The symbols continued their subtle rotation. I began photographing them systematically, hoping to analyze the movement later under controlled conditions. That's when I noticed a change in my shadow, cast by my powerful lamps onto the rocks behind me. It had been a normal human silhouette, but now it was elongated, stretching, and parts of it were moving independently of my own movements. An arm raising when mine was still, the head turning slowly to look at something to the left when I was facing forward. I spun around, heart suddenly pounding. Nothing there, just my equipment, the rocks, the night. But when I turned back to the boulder, my shadow had resumed its normal shape and behavior. The symbols on the rock were moving faster now. The rotation had become obvious, the central spiral spinning slowly counterclockwise. And they were beginning to glow, a faint phosphorescence that wasn't coming from my equipment, a pale blue-white light that seemed to be emanating from within the stone itself. Thunder crashed directly overhead. The first heavy drops of rain began to fall. I should have packed up then, should have retreated to my tent or car, protected my expensive equipment from the deluge that was clearly imminent. But I couldn't tear myself away from what was happening on that boulder. The glowing symbols were rearranging themselves now, no longer rotating around a central point, but flowing like liquid, forming new patterns, new configurations. And with each new arrangement, that sense of presence, of being watched, intensified. The rain fell harder, fat drops splattering on the rock surface, on my equipment, on my upturned face. But the water didn't dim the glow of the symbols. If anything, they grew brighter, as if the moisture was feeding them, activating them. And then they began to rise from the stone. Not physically, not as tangible objects, but as projections of light, three-dimensional forms floating above the boulder's surface. The simple spiral had become a complex helical structure. The geometric patterns had become frameworks, lattices, structures that rotated in multiple dimensions simultaneously. I stood transfixed, rain soaking through my jacket, plaster in my hair to my skull. What I was seeing defied explanation, defied the physical laws I'd built my understanding of the world upon. This was an erosion, revealing hidden markings. This wasn't a clever optical illusion created by indigenous artists. This was transformation, technology, magic, something beyond my vocabulary to describe. Lightning struck a rock formation no more than 50 yards away. The thunderclap immediate and deafening. The brief, intense illumination revealed what my peripheral vision had been trying to tell me for the past several minutes. I was no longer alone. Figures stood on the surrounding rocks, dozens of them, tall, unnaturally still, watching. Not human. The proportions were wrong, the posture too rigid. In that momentary flash, they appeared to be composed of the same glowing symbols that hovered above the boulder, as if living petroglyphs had peeled themselves from the stone and taken three-dimensional form. Darkness returned, but now I could see them more clearly. Their luminescence was subtle but unmistakable. They stood motionless, surrounding me in a perfect circle, waiting. The floating symbols above the boulder pulsed brighter. The rain seemed to pass through them, creating ripples in the light, but not diminishing it. They were organizing themselves into a more coherent form now, something that resembled a portal, a doorway, an opening in the fabric of space itself. And through that opening, I could see something else, another landscape, not the desert night around me, but a vast plain under a sky filled with stars and unfamiliar configurations. Structures rose from that plain, not buildings as we understand them, but massive geometric forms that echoed the symbols carved into the rocks. And moving among those structures, distant but visible, were figures like the ones that now surrounded me. One of the figures nearest to me spoke, not in words, not with sound, but directly into my mind, a communication that bypassed language entirely, conveying concepts for which I had no terms. The door opens when the stars align, when the water comes to the dry places, when one who can see the true patterns is present. Another figure, to my right, you have activated the gateway. You have followed the path. You have completed the sequence. A third, from behind me, now you must choose to go forward, to see what lies beyond, or to return to your limited perception, your fragmented understanding. I don't understand, I said aloud, my voice nearly lost in the downpour. What is this? What are you? We are the ones who taught the rock carvers, who showed them how to create the keys, the maps, the doors between worlds. We are the reason they made these markings, to remember us, to maintain the connection, to ensure the path remained open for our return. The portal above the boulder grew larger, the vista beyond it more detailed. I could see movement there, purposeful activity, beings like the ones around me, but engaged in what appeared to be construction or preparation, building something, preparing for something. Come, see, understand, then return to tell others, to prepare them. The time of separation is ending. The convergence approaches. Figures move toward me, its form flickering as the rain passed through it. It extended a limb, not quite an arm, but something analogous, toward my face. Your eyes must be opened fully. Your mind expanded. You have seen the surface patterns. Now you must see the deeper connections. Something in me, some primal instinct for self-preservation, finally overcame my academic curiosity, my paralysis of wonder. I stumbled backward, away from the reaching figure, away from the portal, away from whatever invitation or transformation they were offering. No, I gasped. No, I don't. I can't. The figure paused. The impression of disappointment radiated from it. All who see the patterns eventually choose to understand. Some require more time, more preparation. Lightning struck again, this time hitting my camera tripod. There was a blinding flash, the smell of ozone and melting plastic. My equipment, my carefully calibrated systems, exploded in a shower of sparks and debris. The portal above the boulder flickered, contracted. The figures surrounding me grew less distinct, their glow diminishing. The connection weakens. The power disperses. The water disrupts the flow. But what has been started cannot be stopped. What has been seen cannot be unseen. What has been opened cannot be closed again. You carry the pattern now. In your mind, in your memory, you have become part of the key. The rain intensified, becoming a solid wall of water. The lightning was constant now, strike after strike hitting the ridge around me. In the strobing light, I saw the figures retreating, fading, becoming translucent. The portal above the boulder contracted to a pinpoint, then winked out entirely. I stood alone in the deluge, my ruined equipment scattered around me. The flat-top boulder once again just a rock with simple spiral carvings visible on its surface. I fled, abandoned my equipment, my research, everything except my car keys and wallet. Drove through the storm to the nearest town, checked into a motel, and didn't leave the room for 2 days. When I finally emerged, the storm had passed. The skies were clear, the desert washed clean. I never returned to Three Rivers, never retrieved my equipment, never published my findings. How could I? What journal would accept an account of living petroglyphs, of interdimensional portals, of non-human intelligences that claim to have taught prehistoric peoples how to create doors between worlds? I resigned from my university position, cited health concerns, personal reasons, moved to the Pacific Northwest, where the near-constant rainfall provides some measure of security, some barrier against whatever was I encountered that night. But they were right about one thing. What has been seen cannot be unseen. The patterns are with me still. I see them everywhere now. In the grain of wood, in the cracks of sidewalks, in the arrangement of leaves on a tree, mathematical relationships, geometric progressions, symbols and signs that point to something beyond our everyday perception of reality. And sometimes when I close my eyes, I see that portal again, that other landscape, those structures, those beings going about their preparations for what? Return? Invasion? Reunion? I don't know. I don't want to know. But the rain helps. It blurs the patterns, disrupts the connections, weakens whatever bridge was established that night on the ridge. I become a student of meteorology, tracking storm systems, moving to stay where the precipitation is heaviest, running from clear skies like others might flee a hurricane. So listen to the rain, my friend. Take comfort in it, as I do. And if you ever find yourself in the desert, among ancient markings left on stone, when the clouds gather and the air grows heavy with approaching storm, run. Do not stay to see what the lightning illuminates. Do not wait to meet those who taught the first artists their craft, because they're coming back. The patterns are aligning. The doors are opening. And not all of them require a human hand to turn the key. Can you hear in the rain? That rhythm? That almost language? They're still trying to reach us. To complete what began at Three Rivers. What began thousands of years ago when they first taught humans to carve their symbols into stone. They're patient. They can wait. But not